The first shot whistled past Hank Dawson's ear like an angry hornet. The second tore through his left shoulder, spinning him sideways but not knocking him down. Not yet. Not while he still had work to do. Blood soaked his shirt as he ducked behind an overturned wagon. The Arizona sun beating down mercilessly on Dry Creek's dusty main street. The Maxwell boys had finally made their move, and they'd chosen a crowded Saturday to do it. "You're dead, Dawson!" shouted Jesse Maxwell from behind the water trough across the street. "Nobody crosses Thomas Maxwell and lives to tell about it." Hank's Colt Army revolver felt heavy in his right hand. His wounded left arm hung useless at his side, but his shooting arm remained steady. 8 years in the Union cavalry during the war between the states had taught him to shoot through pain, through fear, through everything. "I haven't crossed anyone," Hank called back, his voice level despite the fire in his shoulder. "Your brother's quarrel is with the mining company, not me." A bullet splintered the wood inches from his face. "You're standing in his way. That's reason enough." Hank took a deep breath, the way his old captain had taught him. Time slowed. He counted his heartbeats, waited for Jesse to make his move. 3, 2, 1. Jesse's hat appeared first, then his face as he leaned out to take aim. Hank fired once. The shot echoed down the street as Jesse Maxwell fell face first into the dirt, his gun unfired. Frank Maxwell screamed in rage from the saloon doorway, charging forward with both guns blazing. Hank pivoted, aimed, and put a bullet through the man's chest before Frank had crossed half the distance. 2 Maxwell boys down, but Thomas, the eldest and most dangerous, was still out there somewhere. The street fell silent except for a woman's soft crying and the distant barking of a dog. Hank's vision blurred at the edges. Too much blood loss. He needed help. He stumbled to his feet, holstered his weapon, and made his way toward Bennett's apothecary at the end of the street. Sarah Bennett wasn't a proper doctor, but everyone in Dry Creek knew she had healing hands that worked miracles. The bell above the door jingled as Hank pushed it open. The shop smelled of herbs and medicines, clean and sharp against the dust and gunpowder that clung to him. "I need help," he managed before his knees buckled. Sarah Bennett turned from her shelves, her green eyes widening at the sight of him. At 28, she wasn't conventionally beautiful by Eastern standards, too tall, too solid in build, but her competent hands and keen intelligence had earned her respect throughout the territory. "Gunshot?" she asked, already reaching for her supplies. Hank nodded, fighting to stay conscious. "Chair, now." She pointed to a wooden chair by her work table. "Shirt off?" He complied as best he could, wincing as she helped peel the blood-soaked fabric from his wound. "Maxwell boys?" she asked, cleansing the injury with practiced efficiency. "2 of them. Thomas wasn't there." Her hands stilled momentarily. "He'll come for you now." "Probably," Hank agreed. "They've been causing trouble since they arrived 3 months ago," Sarah said, pressing a pat of herbs against his wound. "Claiming rights to the Silver Creek mine, intimidating townspeople, driving away honest folks." Hank watched her work, noting the strength in her movements. "Sheriff Carter's too old to stand against them. And the mayor's too scared," she added bitterly. 4 days later, Hank's shoulder was healing well under Sarah's care when Thomas Maxwell rode into town with 6 new men. Hard-faced gunmen with cold eyes and notched guns. They took over the Iron Horse Saloon, drinking and threatening anyone who looked at them wrong. Sheriff Carter advised folks to stay indoors. Mayor Willis wrung his hands and suggested reasonable accommodation with the Maxwell gang. But Hank knew what men like Thomas Maxwell wanted. Everything. That night Maxwell sent for him. The message was simple. "Come to the Iron Horse. Come alone, or we burn this town to the ground." The saloon fell silent when Hank pushed through the bat-wing doors. Thomas Maxwell sat at a corner table, a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses before him. Unlike his brothers, Thomas had the polished look of a businessman, if you ignored the gun on his hip and the cruelty in his eyes. Dawson, Maxwell nodded to the empty chair. Drink with me. Hank remained standing. Say what you came to say. Maxwell smiled thinly. Direct. I like that. He poured himself a drink. You killed my brothers. They tried to kill me first. Family is family. Maxwell's voice remained conversational, making it all the more chilling. Under normal circumstances, I'd put a bullet in your head and be done with it. What's stopping you? Maxwell's smile widened. Business. I've invested too much in Dry Creek to let vengeance interfere. The Silver Creek mine has the richest silver deposits in the territory. The mine belongs to the people who work it, Hank said. The mine belongs to whoever has the deed, Maxwell corrected, and soon that will be me. Hank's hand hovered near his gun. You didn't call me here to discuss business. No, Maxwell leaned forward. I called you here to offer a wager, a chance to save your miserable life in this pathetic town. The room grew tense as Maxwell stood, addressing the entire saloon now. You're a man with a reputation, Dawson. Former Union cavalry, decorated for bravery. I respect that. His voice hardened. So instead of killing you outright, I'm offering a challenge. Maxwell pointed toward Bennett's apothecary across the street. That woman, Sarah Bennett, the one who patched you up, I want you to marry her. Confused murmurs spread through the saloon. What kind of game are you playing? Hank demanded. Maxwell's eyes gleamed with malice. No game. Marry her today. If she says yes, my men and I will leave town for 1 month. Give you time to enjoy married life. And if she refuses, then I burn this town to the ground, starting with her shop. Maxwell shrugged. Simple choice. Hank saw the trap immediately. Sarah Bennett was respected for her skills, but the town's gossips were unkind about her appearance and unmarried status. Maxwell was using her as a pawn, expecting rejection, creating a pretext for violence either way. Why her? Maxwell's smile vanished. She refused to sell me certain medicinal compounds, said they could be used to make explosives. His eyes narrowed. Nobody refuses Thomas Maxwell. This will be her lesson. Hank turned without another word and walked out of the saloon, the sound of Maxwell's laughter following him into the night. Sarah was closing her shop when Hank arrived, his expression grim. I heard about the meeting, she said, locking the door behind him. News travels fast in Dry Creek. Then you know what he wants. She nodded, her face unreadable in the lamplight. Marriage, to me, as some sort of punishment for us both, I suppose. Hank removed his hat, turning it in his hands. He's giving us no choice. If you refuse, he burns the town. Sarah moved to her workbench, organizing bottles with precise movements. Using me to hurt you and you to hurt me. Clever. I won't force you, Hank said quietly. We can fight. Some of the miners would stand with us. Sarah turned, her green eyes steady. And how many would die? No. She squared her shoulders. I'll do it. Not for Maxwell, not for you, for Dry Creek. It wouldn't be a real marriage, Hank clarified, just on paper. To buy us time. 1 month, she agreed. Then we figure out how to stop him permanently. They were married that evening by the town's preacher, a reluctant ceremony witnessed by half the town. Maxwell stood at the back, smirking throughout. When it was done, he tipped his hat mockingly. 1 month, Dawson. Enjoy your bride. I'll be back for what's mine. As promised, Maxwell and his men rode out that night, leaving Dry Creek in an uneasy peace. Hank's cabin sat on the edge of town, a sturdy one-room structure with a small stable attached. It wasn't much, but it was clean and solid, built with his own hands after the war. You take the bed, he told Sarah as they arrived at their new shared home. I'll sleep by the fire. She nodded, setting down her single bag of possessions. This arrangement is temporary. We both understand that. But temporary or not, they had to make it work. The town was watching, and Maxwell surely had spies keeping an eye on them. The first week passed in awkward silence. Hank rose before dawn each day to tend his horses, then helped at the mine where he worked as security. Sarah continued running her apothecary, her days filled with customers seeking remedies and advice. At night, they shared quiet meals before retreating to their separate spaces. Two strangers bound by circumstance and a common enemy. On the eighth day, Sarah broke their unspoken agreement of minimal conversation. "Why did you really agree to this?" she asked over their evening meal of beans and cornbread. Hank looked up, surprised by the directness of her question. "To protect the town. There were other options. You could have gathered men, fought back, and risked more deaths?" He shook his head. "I've seen enough killing to last a lifetime." Sarah studied him closely. "In the war? Antietam, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor." The names fell from his lips like stones. "I was at Appomattox when Lee surrendered. Thought the killing would end there." His laugh was hollow. "But it just followed me west. Is that why you came here? To escape?" Hank pushed his plate away. "I came looking for peace. Found a good job at the mine instead." He regarded her steadily. "What about you? Why agree to marry a stranger?" Sarah's fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "My father was the town doctor in Tucson. He taught me everything he knew before the fever took him." Her voice softened. "People here need someone with healing knowledge. I won't abandon them. Even if it means being tied to me?" "You're not the worst option," she said with unexpected humor. "At least you bathe regularly." The tension between them eased slightly after that night. They began to establish routines, finding ways to share the small cabin without constantly intruding on each other's space. Sarah discovered that Hank made excellent coffee. Hank learned that Sarah hummed softly to herself when mixing her medicinal compounds. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Victor Blackwood, the town banker, came to visit Sarah's shop. Hank, dropping by to escort her home, overheard their conversation from the doorway. "Mrs. Dawson," Blackwood said, the new title sounding like an insult on his lips. "I've come to discuss your loan." Sarah continued organizing her shelves. "My payment isn't due for another 2 weeks, Mr. Blackwood. Terms have changed. Interest rates have adjusted." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Unless, of course, you'd consider selling your property. I have a buyer most interested in this location." "Maxwell," Hank said, stepping fully into the shop. "He's working for Maxwell." Blackwood's smile vanished. "This is a private business matter, Dawson." "My wife's business is my business," Hank replied evenly. "And we're not selling." "Then you better have payment in full by week's end," Blackwood snapped, storming out. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she turned to Hank. "He's trying to force me out. My remedies compete with the mining company's doctor, who happens to be Maxwell's cousin." "We'll find the money," Hank promised. That night, Sarah revealed her secret. In her workroom at the back of the apothecary, she showed Hank her research, formulas for safer, more effective mining explosives. "The current blasting powder is dangerous and unpredictable," she explained. "My father was working on this before he died. I've nearly perfected it." Hank examined her careful notes. "This could revolutionize mining safety and be worth a fortune to the right buyer." Her eyes met his. "Maxwell must have learned about it somehow. That's why he's so interested in my shop." "We need to protect this," Hank said. "And you. Can you shoot?" Sarah shook her head. "Then I'll teach you." The next day, they rode to a secluded canyon outside town. Hank set up bottles on a fallen log and showed Sarah how to hold his Remington revolver. "Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger," he instructed, standing behind her, adjusting her stance. "Never jerk it." Sarah's first shot went wide. So did her second and third. But by the 10th, she was hitting the target consistently. "Not bad for a beginner," Hank acknowledged. I hope I never have to use this knowledge, she said, returning his gun. So do I, he agreed. But hope isn't a strategy. As they rode back toward town, a shadow moved among the rocks. Hank reined his horse sharply, drawing his gun in one fluid motion. Maxwell's men, he muttered. They're watching us. Three riders emerged from behind an outcropping, guns already drawn. Hank recognized them as part of Maxwell's crew. Well, well, called the leader, a wiry man with a pockmarked face. Looks like the happy couple's out for a ride. Keep moving, Larson, Hank warned. We've got no business with you. Boss says different. Larson's eyes narrowed. Says to keep an eye on you two. Make sure you're really married. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward the small pistol Hank had given her, now hidden in the folds of her skirt. Your boss gave his word, Hank replied. 1 month of peace. Peace don't mean we can't watch. Larson grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Pretty cozy arrangement you got. Forcing a lady to marry you to save the town. Nobody forced me, Sarah said clearly. It was my choice. Larson's horse stepped closer. Maybe you'd prefer better company. Maxwell's got money, power, more than this washed-up soldier. In one smooth motion, Sarah drew her pistol and fired. The bullet kicked up dust inches from Larson's horse, causing it to rear in panic. Next one won't miss, she said calmly. The other men reached for their guns, but Hank already had his aimed. 3 against 2, he said quietly. Bad odds for you boys. Larson fought to control his horse. This ain't over, Dawson. It is for today, Hank replied. Tell Maxwell we're honoring our agreement. He should do the same. The men backed away slowly, disappearing into the rocks. When they were alone again, Hank turned to Sarah with new respect. Quick thinking. There are times when actions matter more than word, she replied, holstering her pistol with shaking hands. As they approached town, they were met by Timothy Blackwood, the banker's 10-year-old son, running toward them in panic. Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, please help. Rattlesnake got me while I was exploring the creek. The boy collapsed, his left ankle already swollen, 2 distinct puncture marks visible through his torn sock. Sarah dismounted immediately, medical instinct taking over. How long ago? Maybe 10 minutes, Timothy gasped. Hurt something awful. She worked swiftly, using her knife to make an X cut over the bite, extracting venom, then applying herbs from her saddlebag. Hank helped restrain the terrified child as Sarah bound the wound with a poultice. We need to get him to town, she said, her face grim. He needs more medicine than I have here. Hank lifted the boy onto his horse, riding hard for Dry Creek with Sarah close behind. They burst into the apothecary, Sarah immediately mixing a complex anti-venom tincture. The commotion drew a crowd, including Blackwood himself, who arrived as Sarah was administering the medicine to his semi-conscious son. What have you done to my boy? Blackwood demanded. Saved his life, Hank replied coldly. Rattlesnake bite, the crowd murmured. Rattlesnake bites were often fatal. She's poisoning him, Blackwood accused. She works with snakes and herbs. She's unnatural. The crowd's mood shifted dangerously. Accusations of witchcraft still carried weight in remote territories. Hank moved between Sarah and the onlookers, his hand resting on his gun. My wife is a healer, he said, his voice carrying through the shop. Without her, your son would be dead already, Blackwood. Show some gratitude. Stand aside, Dawson, Sheriff Carter pushed through the crowd. What's happening here? Before Hank could answer, Timothy Blackwood groaned and opened his eyes. Pa? He called weakly. The tension broke. Even Blackwood couldn't deny the evidence of his son's recovery. His face transformed from anger to confusion, then to something resembling shame. The boy needs rest, Sarah said firmly, and clean bandages tomorrow. Blackwood nodded, suddenly awkward. Send me the bill for whatever you used. There is no bill, Sarah replied. Just bring him back tomorrow so I can check the wound. As the crowd dispersed, Blackwood lingered. looking at Hank with new uncertainty. "Dawson," he said quietly, "Maxwell isn't what he seems. Be careful." Before Hank could respond, the banker hurried away with his son. That night, as they walked home under a star-filled sky, Sarah said quietly, "Thank you for defending me. You saved that boy. I just stated facts." Still, she hesitated. "It's been a long time since anyone stood up for me like that." Hank looked down at her, seeing something new in her expression. "People underestimate you. That's their mistake, not yours." 3 days later, disaster struck at the Silver Creek mine. A tunnel collapse trapped 7 miners. When they were finally rescued, 3 were badly injured, one with a crushed leg that the company doctor wanted to amputate immediately. "There's another way," Sarah insisted, examining the mangled limb. "I can save it." For 3 days and nights, she worked tirelessly, using her knowledge of herbs, poultices, and bone-setting techniques. Hank brought her food and coffee, watching in amazement as she fought to save not just the leg, but the miner's livelihood. On the 4th day, exhaustion finally caught up with her. As she mixed a fresh batch of antiseptic wash, her hands trembled. The bottle slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor, her last supply of precious golden seal root, essential for preventing infection. "No!" she cried, dropping to her knees among the broken glass. Without this, the infection could return. He could still lose the leg. Hank knelt beside her, carefully gathering the larger glass shards. "Can you make more?" "Not without golden seal. It doesn't grow locally." Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. "I've failed him." "No," Hank said firmly, taking her hands in his. "We'll figure this out together." That night, they worked side by side, Sarah teaching Hank how to prepare alternatives using local plants. His cavalry experience with field medicine proved unexpectedly useful. By dawn, they had created a new poultice that, while not as effective as the original, might be enough. 3 more exhausting days passed before the miner's fever broke. The leg would be saved. As they walked home in the gray light of dawn, Hank steadied Sarah with an arm around her waist. She was dead on her feet, swaying with exhaustion. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected, leaning against him. At the cabin, he helped her to the bed, removing her boots as she struggled to stay awake. "Some problems," he said, pulling a blanket over her, "are solved without words." She caught his hand, her eyes meeting his with new awareness. "Stay," she whispered. He did. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat alone in her workroom, staring at the small calendar on her desk. She hadn't bled when expected. Combined with the morning sickness she'd been experiencing for days, the conclusion was inescapable. She was carrying Hank's child. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her still flat stomach. A baby. Their baby. What had begun as a marriage of convenience was now something far more permanent. How would Hank react? They'd grown closer, yes, but a child was a lifelong commitment. And with Maxwell's return drawing near, the timing couldn't be worse. Sarah decided to keep the news to herself for now. Hank needed to focus on preparing the town's defenses. There would be time for personal matters after they dealt with Maxwell. Meanwhile, rumors spread that Maxwell had been recruiting more men in Tucson. Preparations for his return dominated town discussions, with opinions divided between resistance and capitulation. Hank spent his days organizing willing townsmen into a defensive force, teaching basic shooting and tactics. Sarah continued her work at the apothecary while secretly finishing her explosives research, their potential edge against Maxwell's superior numbers. "You should leave town," Hank told her one evening. "Go to your sister in Santa Fe until this is over." Sarah shook her head. "My place is here." Her hand unconsciously moved to her stomach before she caught herself. "Sarah," he took her hands, his expression grave. "If anything happened to you—" "Nothing will happen," she insisted. "We face this together." Before Hank could respond, Urgent knocking interrupted them. Sheriff Carter stood on their doorstep, his weathered face grim. "Maxwell's back," he announced, "with 20 men. They're camped outside town." "Earlier than promised," Hank noted. "Not surprising." "There's more," Carter continued. "Blackwood called an emergency town meeting. Says he's found a legal solution to avoid bloodshed." The town hall was packed when they arrived. Victor Blackwood stood on the small stage, looking uncomfortable as he unrolled a document. "Citizens of Dry Creek," he announced, "I present the legal deed to Silver Creek Mine and surrounding lands, now rightfully owned by Mr. Thomas Maxwell." Outraged shouts erupted from the miners. Blackwood raised his hands for quiet. "The previous communal ownership was never properly registered with territorial authorities," he explained, his voice strained. "As bank president, I facilitated the legal transfer to Mr. Maxwell, who has generously offered employment to current workers, under new terms, of course." "This is theft," shouted one miner. "It's progress," Blackwood countered, but his eyes briefly met Hank's with an unspoken message. "Mr. Maxwell brings investment, connections, and thugs," Hank interrupted, stepping forward. "How much did he pay you, Blackwood?" Before Blackwood could answer, the doors burst open. Thomas Maxwell entered, flanked by 4 armed men. "Mr. Dawson," Maxwell smiled coldly. "Still playing husband to the medicine woman, I see. How touching." "You promised a month," Hank replied evenly. "It's been 3 weeks." Maxwell shrugged. "I grew impatient. Business opportunities wait for no man." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "Speaking of business, Mrs. Dawson, I understand you've developed something of value, a new type of mining explosive?" Sarah stiffened. "My research is private." "Nothing's private in a small town." Maxwell's smile widened. "I'll make this simple. The formula for your explosive, in exchange for peace. Refuse and—" He gestured vaguely toward the crowded room. Hank moved protectively closer to Sarah. "The formula stays with her." "Wrong answer." Maxwell nodded to his men. "Take her." Chaos erupted as townspeople scattered. Hank drew his gun but froze when Maxwell pressed a revolver to Sarah's temple. "Drop it, Dawson," Maxwell ordered, "or your bride dies right here." Hank lowered his weapon slowly. "Let her go. It's me you want." "Actually, it's her formula I want." Maxwell backed toward the door, dragging Sarah with him. "You'll get her back when she decides to cooperate. Until then, any attempt to follow us will end badly. For her in this town." They vanished into the night, leaving Hank standing alone in the emptying town hall, his gun useless at his feet. As the door closed behind them, Hank noticed something on the floor, a folded piece of paper that must have fallen from Blackwood's documents. He picked it up and found a hastily scrawled map showing an abandoned ranch in the foothills, marked with an X and the words Maxwell's Camp. Dawn found Hank and 6 loyal miners preparing to track Maxwell to his camp. Sheriff Carter provided what information he had to supplement the map. "It's a suicide mission," Carter warned. "They'll see you coming from a mile away." "Not if we approach from the high ground behind the ranch," Hank replied, checking his Winchester rifle. "The sun will be in their eyes at dawn." As they prepared to leave, Timothy Blackwood burst into the sheriff's office. "Mr. Dawson, wait!" The boy thrust a sealed envelope into Hank's hands. "Pa said to give you this. Said it was important." Inside, Hank found a detailed chemical formula with a note from Blackwood. "Maxwell forced me to help him. This is Mrs. Dawson's formula that he's after. My son's life made me see the truth. Good luck." Meanwhile, at the abandoned ranch, Sarah sat bound to a chair in what had once been the main house. Maxwell paced before her, his patience wearing thin. "The formula, Mrs. Dawson. I won't ask again." "I need paper," she replied calmly, "an assurance that you'll release me afterward." Maxwell laughed. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "You need me alive to understand the formula," Sarah countered. "The measurements must be precise, or the mixture becomes unstable." deadly unstable. Maxwell studied her face, then nodded to one of his men. Get her paper. As Sarah began writing a deliberately complex version of her formula, she worked the ropes binding her wrists against a nail she'd found protruding from the chair. The hemp fibers slowly frayed as she explained chemical processes to Maxwell, deliberately using technical terms to confuse and delay him. This compound must be added last, she emphasized, indicating a substance on her list. Too early and the entire mixture ignites spontaneously. Maxwell leaned closer, studying the formula. How do I know this is correct? Test it, Sarah suggested, on a small scale. While Maxwell sent men to gather the components she listed, Sarah continued working on her bonds. By mid-afternoon, one wrist was nearly free. She needed to buy more time, but the baby growing inside her gave her strength and determination she'd never known before. She would survive this, for herself, for Hank, and for their child. As the sun began to set, Maxwell's patience expired. Enough delays. We'll test your formula now. In the growing darkness, Hank and his men approached the ranch from the rocky ridge behind it. They watched as Maxwell's men gathered around a table in the yard, mixing chemicals under Sarah's direction. Now! Sarah suddenly shouted, flinging the caustic mixture into the faces of the nearest guards. In the confusion, she broke free, running toward the barn. Gunfire erupted as Hank and his men opened fire from the ridge. Maxwell's confused men returned fire wildly, unable to see their attackers in the gathering darkness. Hank worked his way down the slope toward the barn where Sarah had disappeared. Inside, he found her attempting to saddle a horse. "Sarah," he called softly. She turned, relief flooding her face. "Hank." Their reunion was cut short as Maxwell appeared at the barn door, his gun raised. "How touching!" Hank pushed Sarah behind him, facing Maxwell with empty hands. His gun lay somewhere in the darkness of the barn floor, dropped during his entry. "It's over, Maxwell," Hank said calmly. "Your men are scattered or dead." "Then I have nothing to lose," Maxwell replied, aiming at Hank's chest. The shot echoed through the barn, but it was Maxwell who staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he collapsed to the ground. Behind him stood Victor Blackwood, holding a smoking shotgun. "For my son," Blackwood said simply, "and for this town." Outside, the shooting had stopped. Maxwell's remaining men, seeing their leader fall, had surrendered or fled into the night. In the sudden quiet, Sarah turned to Hank, her hands trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." Hank looked at her questioningly. "I'm carrying your child," she said softly, watching his face for reaction. "I found out 2 weeks ago." For a moment, Hank stood perfectly still, processing her words. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her stomach. "Our baby." "I was afraid to tell you," Sarah admitted. "With everything happening—" "This changes nothing," he interrupted. "And everything." He drew her close. "I came west looking for peace after the war, found purpose in protecting the mine. But with you, I found something more, a future." 2 days later, as Dry Creek began returning to normal, the town gathered to decide its fate. With Maxwell gone and his deed proven fraudulent, the mine returned to community ownership. Blackwood, seeking redemption, proposed a formal, cooperative structure that would protect it from future takeovers. "We need leadership," Mayor Willis said, looking pointedly at Hank. "Someone who can keep the peace." By unanimous vote, Hank Dawson became the new sheriff of Dry Creek. "And what about Mrs. Dawson's formula?" someone asked. "It's still valuable." Sarah stepped forward. "It belongs to the miners of Silver Creek. With one condition, a percentage of profits goes to building a proper clinic for Dry Creek." The proposal was accepted with cheers. 6 months later, as winter settled over Dry Creek, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The town celebrated for 3 days straight. The mine flourished under its new cooperative management. Sarah's safer blasting formula reduced accidents by half, while her clinic treated miners and townspeople alike. Hank kept the peace as sheriff, his reputation alone enough to deter most trouble. Victor Blackwood found unexpected redemption, using his banking knowledge to help the miners secure fair prices for their silver. His son Timothy became Sarah's eager apprentice, learning the healing arts that had saved his life. The town grew and prospered, attracting honest settlers instead of opportunists. A school was built, then a library. What had begun as a rough mining camp was becoming a true community. On the twins' first birthday, as their cabin filled with well-wishers, Hank found Sarah alone for a moment on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever regret saying yes that day?" he asked quietly. "To marrying you?" She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Never. Best decision I never thought I'd make." He chuckled, drawing her close. "Some people spend their whole lives talking about what matters. Some problems are solved without words." "Like us," she agreed, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and their children's laughter drifted from inside the house they had made a home. "Exactly like us."